Bills are coming to the NRG Stadium to maybe avenge last season's loss. Will they step on Houston Texans' chances for any postseason run, or can Houston continue playing hot football?
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Fans, Bills Mafia, Texan fans, Texans, we swarm together everywhere we go. Thank you for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans and Locked On Bills podcast. Your teams every day. Shout out to our everydayers out there who have made both Locked On Texans, Locked On Bills, and Locked On Podcast Network all together, the number one sports podcast in the nation. Without you guys, we would not be able to do it. This crossover episode gonna get a little fun. I got my man Joe Marino from the Locked On Bills, one of the better Locked On hosts on the channel. And we're going to dive into a few things, give us some game predictions for Thursday night primetime game. Also key matchups, D'Amico Ryans versus Joe Brady. What is that going to look like? The chess match between the two great coaches. And the biggest storyline, which I can't wait to dive into, because for the Buffalo Bills, that Russian offense, great with James Cook and Josh Allen. The Russian defense, not so much. I'm John Hickman of the Locked On Texans Podcast. That is Joe Marino, Locked On Bills. And today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Pick app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Joe, how's it going, man?
What's going on, John? Good to be on with you, dude. We got a chance to see this game last year under some different circumstances.
Yes.
Stephon Diggs in his first game against the Bills was all the hoopla, and this time around, we got a couple of teams that are battling for playoff positioning, a couple of teams that were expected to win their division looking up at other teams, and so a big one for both sides of this equation.
Yeah, two of the biggest surprises of the year come from our division. Nobody saw the Colts and Daniel Jones being this good. Nobody saw Mike Vrabel turning things around in New England. So I think this game means a lot to both franchises. Obviously, you guys are already locked in your playoff spot. I think you guys are going to lock that in. You'll be fine. For Houston, they're trying to claw their way back into things. But when I look at what's going on with Buffalo, my Texan fans and listeners out there, they want to know, why hasn't Buffalo been as dominant this year as they've been in the past? Is it because of that Russian defense? Is it because of the lack of weapons outside? Keon Coleman, he's a part of the storyline, missed last week because of missed practice. What's going on in Buffalo?
Well, I think the Bills are 7-3. They're in a decent spot. They had a couple of hiccups along the way. They dropped a game to Atlanta. They dropped one to Miami, where they certainly didn't play to their standard. Of course, had a loss to New England as well. But 7-3, obviously, right now with the Patriots being 9-2, it certainly has a different type of feel, especially because the Patriots have that head-to-head win, and there's not a rematch with the Patriots until Week 15. And so it's about this Buffalo Bills team kind of embracing a bit of an underdog perspective. I know that they're favorites on Thursday night, but a little bit of doubt creeping in about what their capacity is this year. And they certainly have some good things going on offensively, but defensively is where there's been some issues. They've really struggled to defend the run. I'm sure that's something Houston will look to take advantage of on Thursday night. Now, I do wonder, Houston, I'm sure that they get big eyes about being able to run the ball against Buffalo, but Houston's got some questions about their ability to run the football. I mean, This hasn't been a great rushing offense. They're bottom 10 in the NFL and EPA per run, explosive run percentage, yards per carry, success rate, missed tackles, force per run. They're like bottom of the league in yards before contact per attempt. So there's some questions about if Houston is really positioned to take advantage of what has been a very clear weakness in Buffalo with their lack of ability, if you will, to defend the run.
Houston's had some good moments this year. They've had moments where they ran the ball for 5.9 yards per carry. They've had moments where they've rushed for over 140 on the ground. They've had moments where collectively as a unit, they've been able to help the offense establish in themselves. And the numbers show when Houston is able to run for over 100 yards, they're averaging 28 points per game. When they don't, 15.8 yards per game. So the numbers show is night and day. If Houston can get things going on the ground, then offensively that bodes well in Houston's favor. And on the flip side, you mentioned Atlanta loss. They rushed for 210, 6.6 yards per carry. We know how The Baltimore Ravens came out to open up the year last week. Sean Tucker ran crazy. Tampa, 200 yards on the ground. Miami, 200 yards on the ground. No Ed Oliver in this game. Houston Texans, Houston hometown hero. What Houston has right now, and this is important for Buffalo fans to know, they are still trying to figure out what combination of their offensive line works the best. And now with Trent Brown out there, Ed Ingram coming back, and he's going to be healthy, Titus Howard now healthy, I think that gives Houston an opportunity to explore what their guards should look like moving forward. Titus Howard has played tackle for majority of this year up until last game against the Tennessee Titans. And for Houston to close out that game, they ran towards the right side and they had some good yards per pop. So now I'm looking at the Houston Texans going up against, I think, still a good defense in terms of what Buffalo is doing. Passing defense, they're one of the best, I think, second in the league. Run defense, one of the worst. But they got to protect the quarterback and they got to be able to establish the run. So I'm wondering, if Houston will consider maybe moving Titus Howard to left guard, maybe Ed Ingram to left guard. He hasn't played left guard in his career in the NFL, but that's definitely a point of emphasis for Houston. If they can run that ball against a defense that's allowing guys to kind of run crazy, run wild, then you can get Houston in the red zone where they've struggled, but they'll be able to kind of trust that their backs can get upfield and make plays.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing, if Houston can become part of that list of teams that's found success running the football. You mentioned that Houston's obviously still trying to sort out their offensive line. John, I feel like that's been a conversation for 5 years now. Is this Thursday going to be the game where it comes together? I hear you, man. We've been trying to figure out the combination for a long time, but there's no denying that the Bills struggled to defend the run. And, honestly, I feel like their best way of helping their run defense is by scoring. Now, that's a big problem because Houston undoubtedly has the best defense in the NFL. And so I'm curious to see if they can control the game script, right? Because game script's going to matter a ton when it comes to, the advantageous positions that both teams can call plays from. And if the Bills are able to play with some level of a lead in this game, that's going to help their run defense. But obviously a big order against the Texans defense that's holding teams under 17 points per game.
And one thing that I think we both can agree on, this game for both Houston and Buffalo can be won with what the front seven of the defense does. Josh Allen, I think his back is against the wall right now, not operating with a lot of weapons. We'll dive more into that when we come back. But 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in the last couple of games. I mean, he's balling out. And what I like about Houston's chances is they still got Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter. Those guys will play a major role into how Houston can bring down, stop, slow down, however you want to describe it, Josh Allen. On the flip side, the front seven for Buffalo, even without Ed Oliver, I'm kind of looking at you guys and thinking, okay, they can still probably create some pressure on the quarterback, and it won't be C.J. Stroud, and it will be Davis Mills. So when we come back, we got to dive into some more storylines, key matchups, and I want to ask you about Joe Brady and the job that he's done in Buffalo this year. Before we dive into that conversation, this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make every decision every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of the sports season, whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action and enjoy the action. If you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. You pick more or less on at least 2-player stat projections, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play wherever Prize Picks operates. California, Texas, Georgia, which is the 3 states where the best high school athletes come out of, right? Download the Prize Pick app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Locked On NFL. That'll be the code to use for $50 in lineup after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Coming back with more Locked On Texans, Locked On Bills, a conversation around 2 teams trying to figure things out for the postseason. No C.J. Stroud for Houston Thursday primetime at home, and I think that's going to be scary. Davis Mills is going to have to play perfect the 2 games prior to this Thursday night game, they played between the mid to bottom of the league defense. And again, as much as the Buffalo Bills defense has been able to, or lack thereof, let teams run on them, that passing defense has been extremely good. Joe, what's going on with that passing defense in that secondary?
Well, they've been able to get some reinforcements with their secondary. Maxwell Harrison, their first-round pick, missed the first several games of the year. He didn't come back until after the bye. And obviously he's a big part of their formula at cornerback, and, he elevates what they have. And Jordan Hancock, a draft pick as well, is being worked into the lineup where he's sprinkling in, adding some additional athleticism. They've also gotten better because Taylor Rapp is no longer part of the mix. He was trying to play through a knee injury and didn't quite have it. And they've been able to lean back into an old name in Jordan Poyer, who is obviously not vintage Jordan Poyer, but he stabilizes a lot of that defense. So they've been pretty solid with how they've improved their coverage on the back end. And I think, part of their ability to stop the pass is because it is so appealing for teams to try to run the football on the Bills. So that's a bit of a help as well. But, they've been pretty opportunistic with some takeaways. Sean McDermott typically has some good pass defenses, and there's been a lot better performance there on the back end here of late.
So are you saying the numbers are skewed a little bit because teams understand and recognize the weakness and kind of sit back and say to themselves, we don't have to throw all over Buffalo. We can just run it down on them?
Well, I think that's important when you look at volume stats, which are pretty meaningless to me. But if you look at EPA, which is a far better measurement of how good something actually is, they're 5th in pass defense EPA. So they're very situationally sound. But I would say that because it is so appealing to run the football, where they're 29th in defensive EPA, I do think that helps their pass defense a little bit. And, their pass rush has been hit or miss. It started off so well, but they've dealt with a lot of injuries the last few weeks. You mentioned Ed Oliver. Michael Hoyt's a big part of their equation. He's out for the year. Joey Bosa has a wrist injury. He's basically playing with one hand right now, and that's definitely impacted things of late. So there's going to be a lot on, Greg Rousseau, who's a paid, defensive lineman, a first-round pick. Daquan Jones is a veteran. They've got some young guys in TJ Sanders and Deion Walker that are coming along. Javon Solomon as well as a recent draft pick. So they're going to need some of these guys to step up and, maybe take advantage of some of the issues that Houston has up front and, of course, against a backup quarterback.
Yeah, looking for Davis Mills to have a solid performance. I believe the key to victory here for Houston, if they can run that ball well, is if you can keep Josh Allen on the sideline as long as possible and trust your defense to make plays. I think right now Houston has – I know that they're top 5 in force 3 and outs. They may be top 2 in the league. I don't have the number right in front of me. So if you can force some of those Buffalo Bills drives to kind of end abruptly, I think that, plays in the favor for the Houston Texans. Now, I want to get to you guys' offensive weapons. James Cook, we don't got to talk about. James Cook has been lights out for Buffalo, number 2 in the NFL right now. But last week, one of the biggest storylines was no Keon Coleman. And if I could speak freely here, Keon Coleman has been one of the more underwhelming and disappointing receivers out of his draft class. And honestly, in the past 5 years. But without Keon Coleman, no McCole Hartman, I think no Curtis Samuel, what is going to be the game plan for the offense and Joe Brady going up against DeMeco Ryans when things break down and somebody has to make a play? Also, I think no Dalton Kincaid as well.
Yeah, that's the big one. Dalton Kincaid, that's the best player you mentioned right there. That's the one that the Bills would choose to have if they can have any. Well, they didn't have any of those guys last week either. Josh Allen had 357 yards and 6 touchdowns. So against a pretty good Bucs defense. So there is that piece of it. I think the answer is Josh Allen, John. I mean, that guy is your ultimate playmaker. He's the most prolific scoring quarterback the NFL has ever seen. And it's on him. He's the guy that at this time of year, you mash the gas pedal. And you saw that against Tampa, where the full playmaking ability of Josh Allen was unleashed as both a runner and a thrower. And, this is that time of year where November, it matters a ton, and they're in a race for their division. They obviously want to have as high of a playoff seed as possible. And so the start of the year where it's a lot of efficiency, you kind of holster some of Josh Allen. That's kind of over with now, where it's time to go. And so Josh Allen is your answer there. You mentioned James Cook. We can't just gloss over it. The Bills have a very good rushing offense, and that's a big part of their formula. I think when you look at Houston's defense, they're phenomenal. I do like some of the Bills' matchup opportunities with the interior offensive line of McGovern, Osiris Torrance, and David Edwards against the middle three for Houston. That is mostly Sheldon Rankins, Tim Settle, and Mario Edwards. I think those are good defensive tackles. I think they're better penetration style pass rushers than they are run defenders. And so I'm looking to see how the Bills can get their run schemes going to maybe attack those matchups and see what type of rushing production they can get. And then I think when you're throwing the football, obviously Houston's unbelievable. They don't let anything deep down the field, and they play a ton of cover 3, a ton of cover 4, cover 6. Actually, 68% of their coverage shells are those defenses. And while that takes away things deep, it does open up some opportunities in the intermediate areas of the field. When you search through Houston's defense, you're not going to find much in the way of weaknesses. But they are 18th in EPA per play on throws 10 to 19 yards down the field, which I think speaks to that coverage structure that they want to play. And obviously the Bills, they don't have anybody that's going to win the matchups on the outside against Stingley and Lassiter. Okay, that ain't going to happen. But what they do have is a pretty good slot player in Khalil Shakir, which I think his opportunities against Miles Bryant. They do have a pretty good tight end in Dawson Knox. They have receivers that will work the middle of the field, like a Josh Palmer, like a Gabe Davis, who's now back in the mix. And that has to be what they try to do. They have to try to work that intermediate passing game. And, Josh Allen's top 5 in the league in intermediate passing. We talked about the Texans. They're 18th in EPA against intermediate throws. And so you better be able to find your opportunities to run the football, where I think you have some advantages up front. And then you got to work the deep or the intermediate middle of the field if you're going to have any chance of, trying to score enough points to beat Houston on Thursday night.
Joe, you said a few things. This is why I like talking to Joe, man. Joe, we just talk football here. But you said a few things, and I know you mentioned the interior defensive tackles, mentioned Sheldon Rankins, Mario Edwards, and Tim Settle. Houston has a gem that has received more playing snaps in the past several weeks and has been paying off. DeMeco Ryans called him the most consistent inside player for them, and that is Tommy Togiai, who has been phenomenal for the Houston Texans in terms of being able to be an impactful run stopper. So I think that's a player that Buffalo Bill fans need to keep their eyes on. But what did you call Josh Allen? The most prolific? Can you run that back one more time?
Yeah, he's the most prolific scoring quarterback the NFL's ever seen. It's not particularly close when it comes to touchdowns per game. He's the guy. He's scored the most touchdowns in the history of the NFL before the age 30. He topped Peyton Manning last week. If he gets one rushing touchdown against Houston on Thursday night, he will have the NFL's record for rushing touchdowns by a quarterback. He's a dude, man. He's a dude. And so you wonder, where's the offense come from? It's 17, man. That's the answer every time. I know Allen. He went 9 for 30. 9 for 30.
And I kind of wanted to bring that back because he was MVP last year. When people were kind of combing through his MVP resume, that Texans, a week 5 performance. I think we can still smell it in the NRG Stadium from how bad that was. But for Josh Allen, it feels like Allen in this stage of his career, what is this, year 7 for him?
I think it's year 8.
Yeah, so in this year for Josh Allen, it feels like he's kind of figured out how to win at the line of scrimmage, I think mentally and physically, and also his physical tools. Sometimes if the pocket breaks down, he understands which angle to hit to get upfield to keep the play alive. And so when I look at what scares me the most, you have a player on the opposite side of the field like Josh Allen. It's 100% having to stop Josh Allen. And we have a weakness here that I want to let Buffalo Bills fans in on. Azeez Al-Shaair, great linebacker. I'm not going to talk about him. But through 11 weeks, Henry To'oTo'o has been a player that, in terms of stopping the run, he's very good.
Yeah.
But when players around him are out in space, he's going to miss a tackle or two, and it's going to result in big gains. Week 2 against Tampa Bay, last week against Tennessee, these things continue to happen. And when Josh Allen breaks that pocket, my thought process is, if Henry T is out there on an island, one-on-one, having to make a play, and there's no Jalen Petrie for this game, who's ideally who you want out there, I'm scared. Josh Allen he's a guy. He is one of the guys in the NFL. So I just wanted to kind of follow up on that prolific because based off of where Josh Allen came into the league where he is now, man, you can't find too many most improved players during that time span.
Yeah, it's really started back in 2020. He was second in MVP voting in 2020. He's kind of been this guy for a number of years. And I'm guessing if you think about some of the Houston games in particular, of course, his first playoff start was just absolute chaos in a loss there in Houston. And
Houston has his number.
Well, I would say the 40-0 win in Buffalo and the second matchup was definitely a good moment there for Josh Allen. But yeah, last year, 9 of 30 against Houston, it was by far the worst completion percentage of his career by 10%. And, he went on to be the NFL MVP that year. And that was, I think you got to contextualize that game. It was week 5. The Bills did not have Khalil Shakir, who at the time I would tell you was their most important receiver. Obviously getting used to life without Diggs and Davis. It was before they traded for Amari Cooper. Keon Coleman's in his 5th game. It was certainly not the ripest of opportunities for the Bills to go on the road and face what was the best defense in the NFL. So, hang the banner for the 9 of 30 performance. But, I think that there's a lot to learn from that game and a lot of different circumstances this time around. And I'm excited to kind of measure, how much better Josh looks, or maybe even worse this time around against Houston.
Okay. Hey, listen, I love it. Let's dive into some game predictions, maybe give a score prediction and close out on today's Locked On Texans and Locked On Bills podcast. The NBA is back. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Closing out today's show, John Hickman, Joe Marino, Locked On Bills, Locked On Texans. Extremely important game for the Houston Texans, right? They're in survivor mode. Every game is a must-win. Buffalo, you guys can maybe afford to lose, but playoff positioning matters. Game prediction. Joe, I believe when one of the league's best players come to town, you need your best players out there. And the fact of the matter is, Houston will be without 2 of their top 7 best players. Number 1, their franchise quarterback. Number 2, Jalen Petrie. And that's hard for me to look at that, look who they're playing, and pick Houston. I don't think it would be too far-fetched that Houston could possibly win this game. The Texans' defense throughout the entire year, things that offenses do well, I keep saying it, and every week they prove me right, they typically take it away. If your team is rushing for 4.5 yards per carry, well, when they play Houston, it'll be 3.8, right? If your team is lighting it up defensively in the passing game, when they play Houston, you may have a few turnovers. Things may break down around you, and Houston Texans defensive linemen can get after you and create sacks. That said, you need a quarterback that can go shootout for shootout if needed. And this is a game that I think Josh Allen has probably circled on his calendar as a reminder to himself of what happened last year. So right now, I'm going to pick Buffalo. I think Houston can still win, but I can't go against my better judgment. I'm picking Buffalo to win this game. I think Buffalo may have issues with covering Nico Collins in this game, and I still think the Houston Texans will run the ball for a good yards per pop average. But overall, I think that Josh Allen, where he is right now, is just a little bit tgoing much.
I definitely see a path for Houston in this game. It's the defense, right? Houston's defense is off the charts. It's going to be tough for the Bills to score points, and they are certainly very capable offense that typically does score a lot of points, but they're not without their moments of, it just not coming together and the rhythm's not there. Literally 2 weeks ago against the Miami Dolphins when they scored 13 points and turned the ball over 3 times. They were embarrassing against the Falcons and not a very good team. And the Patriots have certainly earned some props for the season that they're having. But this is a Bills offense that they still are finding their own rhythm. And they're working through some new options at receiver, and worked really well against Tampa. And I think this is a tougher assignment on the road. This is a short week for Buffalo. They're the road team. It's the Bills' furthest road trip of the season. And I think that creates for a tough environment, especially when you're talking about the strength of Houston being that defense and, some of the vulnerability that the Bills offense can have from time to time. So I think if Houston comes in and can run the football, which pretty much every team can do against the Bills, if Davis Mills can keep things on schedule, which I think as a backup quarterback, a paid backup quarterback, that's kind of what he does. And I mean, they're 2-0 with him as the starter. I know it's been dramatic, but the guy's had a game-winning drive each of the last 2 games to get the Texans to 5-5 after starting 0-3. Right? It's been a really good job by him to come in and do that. And I know that has a lot to do with the defense, but I think that this is a game that I wouldn't assume that the Bills are going to show up with Josh Allen and this is going to be a win for Buffalo. I think the Bills have their share of questions in this game, and how can they overcome some of their own issues to get this win on the road? So I do think the Bills will win this game, but I think I'm pretty open to the path for Houston to play spoiler as home underdogs on Thursday night.
It's possible. It's very possible. The on FanDuel, the spread right now is 5.5 points. I do not see Buffalo scoring more than 20. The concern for me is Houston, even with CJ Stroud. Once they get down to the red zone, the offense loses itself. And you're talking about having the best players against a player like Josh Allen and James Cook, who I have to add to the conversation. Even with their best players, that's been an issue for Houston all year. So it's hard to pick a team that's still trying to figure out themselves, albeit they've improved a lot during this last 7-game streak where they won 5 and lost 2 games. When teams like Buffalo come to town, if you have shown me you cannot score points when it matters, then it's hard to pick. Jacksonville, you can pick Houston. Tennessee, you can pick Houston. But against Buffalo, if you don't score those points, then it's just hard to roll with them. But I do think, again, like there is, like I said, a path to victory for Houston. Texan fans are probably going to get on me. They're going to call you more of a Locked On Texans host than I am. But the reality is I've seen 11 weeks of the same story. If they pull it off, which I hope that they will, then I could change my stance on moving on the Houston Texans moving forward. But they got to do it first.
Listen, John, when I pick against the Bills, boy, the Bills Mafia is not a big fan of that either. So I hear you on that.
You got the Soprano family, then you got the Bills Mafia. I don't know who's scarier when things are going wrong.
Well, listen, I am interested to see how this offense comes together for Houston because, I mean, let's face it, everything's new, right? New coordinator. We're working through the offensive line. I mean, it's pretty much brand new receivers outside of Nico Collins, a brand new running back room, right, compared to last year. Dalton Schultz obviously back at tight end. But, I kind of – this season for Houston has kind of gone in some ways like I thought it would, where the defense is keeping them in it. The offense is finding its way. But I'll be honest, before CJ went down with that concussion, I felt like he was starting to be himself there and, like, making those big moments, some big third down throws, dude. Like, I thought it was coming, and it was very unfortunate that he took that hit. But, I mean, it's really not great that he's missed so much time, right? I mean, hopefully he gets that healed up and can get back on the field because – obviously, Houston's better and the NFL's better when CJ Stroud's doing his thing.
Yeah, I feel like CJ finally put it together against San Francisco. And before he went down against the Denver Broncos, a game where Houston led up until Denver's last drive, the outcome of that game could have been a whole lot different if Nick Caley would have called some red zone there down at the 2-yard line, some plays that made sense. I feel like the play calling at that time just kind of stopped the momentum, but it felt like in that game and the Denver Broncos, they're kind of viewed the same breadth as the Houston Texans defense, right? Top 2 in the league. And so we saw CJ Stroud kind of play with him a little bit, he was getting busy out there. I was at that game. And so it felt like, this is a different version. This is the version that we wanted to see. In terms of the time missed, He got hit by a player, but the impact really came from the head hit from the ground.
Yeah.
If this game was on Sunday, then we'd be looking at CJ only missing 2 games and he'd be ready to go.
Right.
Short turnaround week. Didn't get cleared for Thursday night. But I think what's important for everybody to realize is this is one game in the season that may not end up in the playoffs. Obviously, you want your best players out there. Obviously, CJ is one of your best players on that field. But you have to keep him healthy for his sake, for the team's sake. Once you get past Thursday, you can reevaluate, come back following forward. The Colts, which is another important game, and that's a team division game where you absolutely going to need your quarterback. So I'm okay with CJ being out. A lot of Texan fans are getting to a point where they're calling him soft. And why is he missing games? Again, guys, if this was Sunday and not Thursday, we had a different conversation. He'd be playing. He practiced on Tuesday, just couldn't get cleared to play. So take his time because when he gets back out there, I mean, Houston's going to need him to close out the year. Indy and KC in back-to-back games.
Yeah, listen, if I was a Texans fan, I'd be thinking about this. Still got 2 to go against the Colts. And I think they've shown some vulnerability lately. They're probably going to lose to the Chiefs on Sunday in a moment where the Chiefs have to have it. I think it's right there. I mean, obviously, you got to take care of your business. There can't be too many hiccups along the way, but I think the schedule softens up for Houston with Arizona and the Raiders. And then, of course, you get the 2 against the Colts, which are not pushover. Those are obviously challenging games, but I wouldn't say that this race in the South is over by any means.
You need your quarterback for those important games.
Of course.
And those important games are Indy twice, and you got to stay ahead of KC, all right, who's fighting for the same position that Houston's fighting for right now. So I'm okay, man. Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans, Locked On Bills crossover Thursday. We really enjoyed talking with you guys. Joe Brady, again, one of the best in the business, just talking football. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Joe, where can all of our listeners and viewers find all of your great work?
Let's go to thejoemarino.com.
Simple as that, man. Simple guy, repping the Bills. Until next time, ladies and gents, Texans and Bills fans across the nation, thank y'all for making the #1 podcast, the Locked On Podcast Network, sports podcast. Until next time, peace.